Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, some pretty significant discussions ongoing in Raleigh as property taxes remain a major topic of discussion for families all across the state. We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Just search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll get a new program. Take it with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal challenges that you might be facing, any legal questions you might have, reach out to them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. There is an ongoing brewing discussion in the state of North Carolina over property taxes, and kind of to lay the stage as to how we got to this point. Over the last 15 years, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, the North Carolina legislature, which has now been controlled by Republicans since the 2010 midterm elections, those members being sworn in early 2011, they have made very strategic changes to the way in which North Carolina operates. And we see the result of that in our tax code, right? We've seen personal income tax drop significantly. Prior to 2010, North Carolina had some of the highest property taxes anywhere in the southeast half of the United States, which, of course, as you're paying your taxes in your paycheck, as you're paying taxes at the end of the year, that personal income tax rate is a significant driver. And so with North Carolina having such a ridiculously high tax rate, it was, of course, not incentivizing people to come to North Carolina. It was not incentivizing people to move to the state and pay a very high personal income tax. That has fortunately been changed dramatically by the North Carolina legislature over the last 15 years, with that rate significantly falling and continuing to reduce in the years to come. Put a pin in that. It remains the major discussion in Raleigh as to why we don't have a budget. So that's one thing that they've done. The other thing, it relates to corporate income taxes. That is also significantly reduced and significantly dropped over the last 15 years in an attempt to make the state of North Carolina more lucrative for businesses. And I would argue, with all of the news that we've seen over the last couple of years, that has been a successful venture, right? Why? Well, look at CNBC and their number one state for business over the last couple of years. And you will see very clearly that North Carolina, 3 out of the last 5 years, has remained the number one state for business. Now, that, of course, is a metric that is defined by a bunch of different factors. CNBC lists all of that stuff out on their website. We're not going to dig into all of those details here today. But there's a variety of different metrics that make North Carolina, when ranking against all of our peers, both regionally and across the rest of the United States, the number one state for business. In large part, I am a strong believer that the reason that North Carolina is in the position it is now is that taxes have been lowered and government has gotten out of the way. This is basic free market capitalism at its finest. When government reduces burdensome regulation, when government reduces red tape, and when government reduces taxes, you see growth. There is a reason why North Carolina is booming right now. And as much credit as Roy Cooper wants to claim for it, it's got nothing to do with Roy Cooper and the policies that he attempted to usher in over his 8 years in the governor's mansion. Similar situation ongoing now with Josh Stein. Same thing. He'll proclaim and he'll take the interview. He did this interview last year on the USS Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington with CNBC as we were ranked the number one state for business. These are not Democrat policies that have driven North Carolina to the success that we are fortunately feeling right now. It's not. It was and remains the very disciplined financial decisions of those lawmakers in Raleigh that make up the Republican majority in the North Carolina legislature. We have seen, and you don't have to go back that far to see what Democrat control in this state looks like and what Democrat policies make the state of North Carolina become. Go back to 2010, furloughing state employees, furloughing teachers, the highest tax rates anywhere in the Southeast, owing hundreds of millions of dollars to the federal government as it relates to medical debt. No rainy day fund. The state of North Carolina was in an absolutely atrocious and absolutely miserable economic spot prior to 2010. And there's only one group of people that you can look at and say, why did things change so dramatically? And it was the Republican majority. So I lay all of that out to build the case here that the state of North Carolina has seen significant reduction in costs for its citizens, for its businesses, due to the fact of these changes in Raleigh. And that leads us into the discussion today over property taxes. While the state itself, due to the Republican-led majority in Raleigh, has been very smart and very strategic, at least for the most part, in its financial stewardship, in its financial relief, unfortunately, many municipalities, many governments, many counties, many cities, many towns have not. And that is unfortunately essentially wiping away some of the relief that you would feel from continued tax rate drops in Raleigh. And so let me lay this out for you. The General Assembly has a sliding scale in which the personal income tax rate will continue to drop. And these aren't major drops, but we're talking about a 0.25% here, 0.5% there on the personal income tax, which at the end of the year is significant. The hundreds, maybe depending on how much money you make, thousands of dollars that you are saving. So when you look at that and then compare to what's going on with property taxes in many of these areas, it's a wash. Because while the citizens are getting relief in their paycheck, essentially, as it relates to the personal income tax rate, they are getting hit on the other side by their county, their city, or their town with exorbitant increases in their property taxes, either on their home or if they're a small business owner that owns said property in which their business operates, they are paying, of course, the taxes on that commercial property in which they are operating. And so those factors have now driven the North Carolina General Assembly to get involved in things that traditionally have just been left to local governments. And unfortunately, due to very stupid decisions by these local governments, now lawmakers in Raleigh are getting involved. And, inherently, I don't like that. I want local government to be able to make their own decisions. I want government not to, or this kind of structure of government to kind of lap on top of each other. I'm not interested in that. I don't want the state necessarily telling local governments how they need to operate and what they need to do. There's a reason why there's municipal elections every other year. There's a reason why there's county elections that many of us will see here across North Carolina coming up later this year. You elect local leaders to make local decisions. But the General Assembly essentially has been backed into a corner by these local governments, and they're out of control spending. And so that has prompted two different measures, at least right now, and I suspect there will be more as we continue through the General Assembly's short session here over the next couple of months. But there are two main measures right now that are being run in Raleigh that could provide and should provide significant relief to taxpayers across specifically the areas in our state where there has been an explosion in growth, where we have seen major amounts of influx of new people moving to the area, purchasing properties, purchasing houses, starting their own businesses. We are seemingly right on the precipice of some serious relief by lawmakers in Raleigh when these local officials, these local municipalities, unfortunately, continue to raise the tax rate or continue to collect insane amounts of money on the backs of their taxpayers, making it inherently less affordable to live. And right with the discussion that is existing at the national level right now, Democrats want to talk about affordability. One of the ways, the surefire ways to make your life more unaffordable is to jack up your property taxes every couple of years when the reevaluation cycle comes through. I mentioned two ongoing measures in the North Carolina General Assembly to provide some relief to property owners across the state of North Carolina. We're going to start off with what is being described and what is described as a levy limit. This is something that is being now pushed through the North Carolina General Assembly to provide additional relief to ratepayers, to property owners across the state of North Carolina. So here's the problem that's been taking place, and there's a great analysis from Joseph Harris, who works over at the John Locke Foundation. I'll have the links to that in the show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. There's a lot of charts and numbers and financial graphs in here that are very insightful if you live in some of the more populous and more booming counties across the state of North Carolina. He writes at the beginning of his piece, as property tax bills have risen rapidly across the state, property tax reform has moved to the forefront at the General Assembly. Among the policy options under consideration are levy limits, which restrict the annual growth rate of total property tax revenue. So let me break down what's been going on here. You have reevaluations that take place in counties, and there is not one time period in which it takes place. Counties are required to do reevaluations at a minimum of every 8 years. Some counties do it every 2 years. 4 years tends to be the most common time for it to take place, every 4 years. But there's a sliding scale anywhere between 2 and 8 years in which a municipality a county conducts their reevaluation period, which is exactly what it sounds like. They hire a third-party firm, or they have people internally that go around the county and reevaluate what your property is worth based on what in addition to what it was previous years, depending on what that cycle is, 2, 4, 6 years, however often they do that. And in the areas of North Carolina where we've seen explosive growth and more people moving into the state and moving into the area, there's no surprise the property values are skyrocketing. I mean, this is a basic supply and demand. You've got more and more people that want to be in North Carolina. In part, we've got a phenomenal climate here in the state. You can be, if you live in the central part of the state, 3 hours gets you to the beach, 3 hours gets you to the mountains. Even if you live in the east or west, it's only, and it's a lengthy car ride, I'll admit, 6-7 hours. But in that period of time, you can be at the beach or be at the mountains. The state of North Carolina has a lot to offer geographically, a lot to offer with its climate. You've got, of course, as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, a very lucrative tax environment for families, not just for the wealthy, right? This is what the left always talks about. Oh, these tax cuts only help the billionaires and the millionaires. No, that's actually not true. As somebody that is a middle-class American here in North Carolina, a property owner, relief as it relates to either personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, or property taxes helps me significantly, right? Because I pay my property taxes. I pay personal income taxes, especially as a contractor. It is a significant amount that I pay to both the state and federal government as it relates to taxes. So this stuff absolutely has an impact for anybody that is paying taxes. And so that starts at the lower middle class level when you get above income thresholds where you are required, in most cases, to pay some level of taxes to the state and federal government. So in these areas, again, where there is a lot of population growth, we have seen property values skyrocket. And I've seen this firsthand. I purchased my home in July of 2020, the middle heat of the COVID-19 pandemic. Got a very good deal on it when I purchased the house. There obviously wasn't a lot going on. And just a couple of years later, my property was reevaluated and gained more than $100,000 in value, which is a significant amount of increase in a small period of time. If you said, oh, I bought a house 25 years ago and it's gained $100,000 in value, over that 25-year period, that would be a good rate of growth. Obviously, maybe you want a little more, a little less. That would make sense. But you've got people that have purchased homes across North Carolina in just the last couple of years, last 3 or 4 years, that have literally seen the value of their property double, if not triple in some cases. And so when your property doubles or triples in value, mine went up almost 50%, almost doubled. When you see that, that means that your tax bill, the burden that you bear on your property taxes, goes up significantly. And it creates this issue that exists in municipalities, specifically in counties and cities all across North Carolina, where they are getting windfalls of cash. Because you don't have to move the tax rate up or down to generate potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in additional quote unquote revenues. Why is that the case? If your property tax rate is 30 cents in the county, 30 cents per $100 worth of value, and your property goes from being worth $100,000 to $300,000, your property tax bill will go up that exact same amount. The tax rate hasn't moved, right? The value of your property is what went up significantly. That your taxes and the tax rate itself has not gone up. But because your property is worth so much more, you see a tax bill that is 2, 3, 4 times what it was just a couple of years prior. So that has brought forth this discussion over the state of North Carolina implementing what is called a levy limit. And as I just read from Joseph Harris over at the John Locke Foundation, that levy limit would restrict the annual growth rate of total property tax revenues in these counties. He goes on in his piece to write, unfortunately, the discussion has been married by misconceptions that levy limits would force cuts to local government budgets or prevent resources or prevent revenues rather from keeping pace with rising costs and growth. However, levy limits do not require local governments to reduce their existing budgets when they are well designed, and allows revenues to increase with inflation and property growth. He continues by saying this article aims to provide clarity by examining how property tax revenues in the state's 10 largest counties have grown over the past decade, over the last 10 years. Relative to hypothetical benchmarks that limits property tax revenue growth to inflation and population growth. And here is the shocking number through this analysis. Across the top 10 largest counties in North Carolina, according to Joseph Harris, property tax collections exceeded inflation plus population growth by more than $2.6 billion over the last 10 years, meaning that these municipalities, these counties, have generated over $2.5 billion worth of additional revenues over the last 10 years. And when we say additional revenues, it's not that they're generating a product, it's not that they're selling a service. That is $2.6 billion that have been extracted from taxpayers, from working class North Carolinians, into these government budgets. That is money that is now out of the economy and into the government coffers. And that creates a major, major problem for the state's economy. We'll continue this discussion on levy limits coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. Truly not possible without Melissa Gott and her team. And remind you that if you have any legal questions or challenges, we're talking about property taxes here on the program this morning. If you are going through the process and looking to purchase a home, maybe you're looking to purchase any sort of a commercial property, you want to make sure that you've got a good group of people behind you during that transaction. And there's nobody I would trust more than the law group here in Wilmington. Going all the way back to 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of the state. As I mentioned, purchasing my home back in 2020, reached out to Melissa Gott and the team over at the law group as I was in that process, sat down with her team. They walked me through every step of the process as a first-time homeowner. having really no idea whatsoever exactly what I was going to deal with. The law group had my back every step of the way. Their dedicated team ensured that anytime I had any questions, and believe me, I had plenty. It was an odd time back in July of 2020, the middle of COVID-19. They made sure all of my questions were answered, made sure any issues that I thought could arise were dealt with, and they resolved them very quickly. The law group is located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or online lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More on property taxes and some movement in the North Carolina General Assembly coming up as the Nick Craig Show continues streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Thursday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. We are having a pretty important discussion today over some ongoing movement in the North Carolina General Assembly to provide what I will describe as significant relief to property owners across the state of North Carolina. As you've already heard me lay out, just a kind of a quick recap, the state of North Carolina is booming. A lot of people are here. A lot of people want to be here. A lot of people continue to move here. That has caused property taxes or home values, in many areas across the state to absolutely skyrocket. And with those skyrocketing rates, counties across the state of North Carolina are seeing significant windfalls of cash. Not because they're raising their taxes or raising their tax rate, but because the properties are ballooning so much in what they are worth that you keep the rate the same or even lower it a little bit. And many of these municipalities are generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year in additional revenue. So we're going through a story about levy limits over at the John Locke Foundation. Joseph Harris has the analysis. The link's over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. And he's looking at, in his analysis, He looks at the 10 top counties in North Carolina and shows what kind of additional revenues that they have generated in comparison to what would be described or called a levy limit, which would put a cap on how much additional revenue a county can generate through property taxes, which, if we're being perfectly honest about it, property tax revenues, if you want to call it that, are the largest sum of money that municipalities and counties take in, right? Because you've got property all over the place, all of your homes, all of your businesses, and with these counties ballooning in population, it is a surefire way for significant amounts of revenue. And so there's this chart over in his study showing that the property tax revenue growths in the fiscal year 2016 through 2026 over a 10-year period of time. It shows the difference between what property tax revenues could have been generated with levy limits and what actually were generated through policies and decisions in many of these municipalities. And unfortunately, the worst example of this is Cabarrus County. Starting in 2016, looking over that 10-year period of time, the property tax revenue taken in 2016 was $140 million. Moving years forward from that went up $10 million in 2017, another $8 million in 2018, $11 additional million in 2019, and you can understand how this continues to go forward all the way up until 2026, where Cabarrus County pulled in $289 million in property tax revenues. So from $140 million in 2016 to almost $290 million in just a 10-year period of time. And Joseph Harris lays out in his study over at the John Locke Foundation, had a levy limit been in place, Cabarrus County would have still been able to generate about $236 million in property taxes. So still a significant amount. But when you look at the excess property taxes paid in Cabarrus County over that period of time without a levy limit, you are looking at the county extracting nearly $300 million from their residents. $300 million from the people that own property and live and work in Cabarrus County. And I'm only using Cabarrus because it's the worst offender on the list, but this remains the case in many other counties, including Wake, Durham, Buncombe, Guilford, Forsyth, Mecklenburg County actually surprisingly doing well, which I was astonished to see. Similar situation in New Hanover County as well, Cumberland County. So some counties are handling this well, but the worst offenders, Cabarrus, Wake, Durham, and Buncombe counties, where they have extracted hundreds of millions of dollars from their citizens, from the property owners, whether it's personal property, your home, or through businesses that you might own that have physical footprints and physical property associated with it. And so you start creating this situation where these counties don't have to reduce the tax rate because, it's not a popular thing for an elected official, whether we're talking about a city councilman or a county commissioner. It is not a popular thing to say, we're going to raise your taxes. We're going to raise your tax rate. But because, again, those property values have ballooned and skyrocketed so much, they don't have to increase the property tax rate. And in many cases, they are able to slightly reduce the tax rate. And you might think, oh, well, Nick, if the rate is reduced, what's the issue here? The rate is reduced not enough to work out what the increase in property is. And you may have heard the term, if you're somebody that watches, and I don't fault you if you don't because they're relatively boring meetings. If you watch budget meetings across the state of North Carolina, you will hear a lot of discussion over going quote unquote revenue neutral with the property tax rate. Meaning, because properties have gained so much in value, you can reduce the property tax rate at the county or the city significantly and still generate the same amount of revenue or similar amounts of revenue to years past. Because you're cutting the rate in conjunction with the values of the properties rising so significantly. And if you do that, if you're constantly fighting for a revenue neutral tax rate, things remain okay. And one of the examples in here is Mecklenburg and New Hanover County. Surprisingly, these two areas have continued to reduce the property tax rate to essentially even out with the amount of growth in property values. Cabarrus, Wake, and Durham counties have not, and it has created this problem where Cabarrus County has, over the last 10 years, has taken in $300 million additional dollars. Now it's not total, but over that 10-year period of time, every year, looking at the some of these numbers are astonishing. 40 million, 50 million additional dollars a year that Cabarrus County is able to put into their coffers. And that, of course, is on the back of the taxpayer. And so now the North Carolina General Assembly, understanding kind of the issue that is taking place here, the North Carolina General Assembly has begun the process of attempting to implement a levy limit at the statewide level. The lawmakers in Raleigh, specifically in the North Carolina House, have begun the discussion of saying, well, maybe this levy limit is something that we need to take a look at because, some of these municipalities are having a major discussion. So here's the latest that we have from Carolina Journal back just a couple of weeks ago. The story reads, North Carolina House Republicans have formally filed legislation to place a constitutional amendment before voters that would require limits on how much local governments can grow property tax revenues. The legislation, House Bill 1089, sponsored by Representatives Brian Echeverria from Cabarrus. No surprise there. It's his home county that we were just talking about. Representative Howard from Davie County, Representative Schetzer from Catawba, and Representative Aaron Perret from Wake County would amend the state's constitution to direct the North Carolina General Assembly to enact a cap on property tax growth through a levy limit. The bill was filed on April the 30th and referred to the House Finance Committee. The bill's filing follows numerous House committee meetings in recent months examining property tax trends and reform options. Here's a quote from Joseph Harris in the article. House Bill 1089 is the next step in property tax reform process. While Senate Bill 889, which we'll get into in a few minutes, addresses short-term concerns by delaying reappraisals, this bill begins to tackle the underlying issue by limiting how quickly property tax collections can increase. Unlike caps on tax rates or property values, a levy limit restricts overall revenue growth. Even as property values rise, local governments remain limited in the additional revenues that they can collect. With Harris saying in part, a well-designed levy limit should account for inflation and population growth, so it reflects real economic conditions and it needs to be comprehensive. Otherwise, local governments will find ways around it, undermining the goal of providing relief for taxpayers. And he's absolutely right about these municipalities, these counties, finding ways around these levy limits. Because let's be perfectly honest, these municipalities, these counties and these cities, they love all the free money. And they're just like every other government. They love free money. And so anytime that they can not do literally anything but reappraise properties and reassess property values and generate $80 million in 1 year worth of additional revenues, unfortunately, they're going to do it. And this is an issue across party lines. We see this in red counties like Cabarrus. We see this in blue counties like Wake County and Durham County. This is an issue across the board. And it really, to me, comes back to the issue of very poor financial decisions by these governments, where they have decided that they're just going to essentially rob the taxpayer blind so that they can, of course, continue to generate all of their, or continue to generate revenue and, of course, pay for all of their pet projects. Because at the end of the day, that is what, unfortunately, we see so many times in government. We're talking about a constitutional amendment that is working its way through the North Carolina General Assembly. It's the official name of the official number of the legislation is House Bill 1089, which would not in itself enact a levy limit, but would ask voters potentially coming up later this year if they would in fact be in favor of this. It would be a constitutional amendment, and the way that would work here in North Carolina is voters would be asked on a ballot, do you support a levy limit? Obviously, the wording and the verbiage of that would be refined to make sense to the voter, but it would say, do you support this? Yes or no? If a majority of people say yes and vote yes when this is on a ballot across the state of North Carolina, then after the constitutional amendment is passed, the North Carolina General Assembly comes back into session and actually crafts legislation that would enact said constitutional amendment. And so that's how the process would play out for this discussion over levy limits here in North Carolina, which again, many individuals, and you'll hear this from especially those in government, they'll say, oh, you can't go forward with a levy limit. You can't hamper our ability to generate revenues as a county. You're going to cut our revenues. That is not the case at all. These levy limits build in inflation, which of course is a consistent factor, and population growth, some level of growth in the county. And so your revenues are never going to be less unless you are seeing a mass exodus of your county. Unless there is negative growth in your county, I don't see a circumstance where a county or a city or a town would lose out on additional revenues under a levy limit. And voters have been asked about this. In the March Carolina Journal poll, voters were asked, is your property tax a major burden, minor burden, or not a burden at all? 38.1% of voters said it was a major burden, 38.7% said it was a minor burden, and only 17% of voters said it was not a burden at all, with about 6% saying that they were not sure. And so you add the major and minor burden together, and you have a very clear majority of individuals across the state of North Carolina, more than 70%, that say, yes, this is a problem. My property taxes, which of course you pay each and every year, is a major problem. And for most folks that have a mortgage, you see this on a monthly basis. If you don't own your property outright, you are most likely making your county tax payment or your city tax payment through your monthly mortgage in what is what is called that an escrow account, where that money is taken out once a year whenever those bills are due. And you'll see this. You may have gotten a letter from your mortgage company. I know I did over the last couple of years saying, hey, we're doing an escrow analysis on your account. And that caused my monthly mortgage payment to go up pretty significantly to make up for these additional taxes that have to be paid out. Your property taxes, and in many cases, your homeowners insurance are paid out of that escrow account. So it's not like once a year you're just seeing a big tax bill. This is taking place month after month after month and remains a major burden on citizens across the state of North Carolina. And so I'm very glad to see that this legislation is being run in the North Carolina House, giving voters the choice, right? This does not say, this legislation, as I just mentioned, is not saying, oh, we're doing this as the General Assembly. It's saying, hey, let's put this on the ballot. Let's make an amendment to the state's constitution, which of course has to be approved by voters, and ask them, what do they think about this? And based on polling, with 76.8% of people saying it's either a major or minor burden, it is no surprise. It would not be surprising or shocking to me that voters across the state of North Carolina would come out very clearly and say, yeah, we're absolutely in favor of this. This is absolutely something that we need to look at. This is something that we should do. I don't like seeing every 4 years my mortgage payment increase significantly because the county has reassessed property values and has refused to cut the tax rate to go to revenue neutral, which is many of what these counties are failing to do. Again, both counties run by Democrats and counties run by Republicans. Because when government sees a windfall of cash and doesn't have to do anything, they aren't really incentivized. And that's why You've seen some of these counties like Cabarrus, like Wake, and like Durham that have literally generated, in the case of Cabarrus and Wake, more than $290 million worth of excess revenues just on property tax, right? This includes nothing else. This isn't sales tax, ad valorem. This is literally just property taxes. You have seen $200+ million worth of additional revenues over just the last 10 years. But let's be clear, because we have to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. When a county or when a government is talking about quote unquote generating revenues, let's understand what that is. That is taking money out of your monthly budget every single month and giving it to the government. They are not selling something and generating revenue. They are not providing a service and generating revenue. They are taking your property, the value of said property, and generating hundreds of millions of dollars off of it collectively across an entire county. And so it should be something that I would suspect that voters all across the state of North Carolina are in favor of, right? Especially those on the political left. You know, I see a lot of discussion taking place on the left right now about affordability. That's the big buzzword. Donald Trump is making your life less affordable. And so Democrats at the national level have come up on this idea of affordability, and everything needs to be affordable. And so this legislation seems very clear to me that Democrats should be highly in favor of this if truly you're interested in supporting affordability for your residents, for the citizens of not only North Carolina, but the entire country. I mean, you want to talk about something that is a major burden on residents across the state. It's their monthly mortgage payment on top of everything else. Yes, rising gas prices. Yes, interest rates that have remained incredibly high over the last 4 or 5 years, making it very unaffordable to even get a mortgage in the first place or get a car loan or assume any amount of debt with an interest rate. All of these things combined together have led to the unaffordability that now seemingly exists in the United States. And so I'm glad to see that lawmakers are talking about a levy limit in the North Carolina House. Currently, that legislation, according to the General Assembly's kind of bill tracking service, remains in the Committee on Finance. If it moves out of there, presumably it will move on to the Rules, Calendar, and Operations of the House. It will make its way to the full House floor for a vote. If it is successful there, it will, of course, then go over to the North Carolina Senate. They'll see if they agree with it. It'll go through the process there and then finally make its way to the governor's desk for a signature to determine whether this would be a constitutional amendment that would go on the ballot sometime later this year. With that going on, there's also another bill. I mentioned Senate Bill 889, which is a moratorium on property reevaluations for this year. Now, it doesn't say that the reevaluations can't happen, but what it says is if you're reevaluating property in 2026, you have to use the old values for this tax year, and you can use the new appraised values, the new reevaluated values in the next year. That legislation has been introduced in the North Carolina Senate, so we've got things going on from both different sides, both different chambers, I should say, in the North Carolina General Assembly. That is more of a short-term kind of fix for some counties across state. There's 18 that have a reevaluation scheduled for this year. The levy limit would have a much broader impact and a longer-term impact on all 100 counties across the state of North Carolina. I am highly in favor of this levy limit concept being introduced by the North Carolina House, and I look forward to voters having to decide on it, hopefully coming up later on here in 2026. There is a major problem when you look at a chart and you see this. When you see Cabarrus, Wake, Durham, Buncombe counties generating these kinds of additional revenues just on property taxes. There's a problem here. Government gets too fat, dumb, and happy when it gets free money. And let's be perfectly honest about it. Government pisses a lot of this stuff away on nonsensical garbage because it's quote unquote free money. when you are generating, looking at the chart just on Cabarrus County, when you go to 2025, when the county generates an additional $52 million over what the levy limit presumably could be, they're still generating $226 million in property tax revenue, right? So they're not at the poorhouse. $226 million in property tax revenue, and you generated an additional $52 million on top of that. What do you think happens with that money? It gets wasted. It gets put into pet programs. It gets put into stupid pilot programs. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie on this. And that's exactly what happens. Governments are addicted to this free money. And there is very few governments, and I will give a shout out to New Hanover County, who has done a very good job with this levy limit. You look at what's gone on in New Hanover County over the last 10 years. Let me see if I can pull this up. And you see a situation in which, there was one year, 2022, where the county generated $31 million in additional revenues. There's a tax, there were obviously reevaluations taking place in 2022. But overall, only generating $42 million in additional revenues over that period of time. Now, there's been some years where they've generated less than what the quote-unquote levy limit would call for. That's due to the fact of moving the tax rate to what is called revenue neutral. In 2025, they generated $235 million worth of property tax revenue. With a levy limit, they would have been able to generate $247 million. So that's an almost $12 million difference in what was actually collected versus what could have been collected under the levy limit. Same thing in 2026, 249 or estimated in 2020 or the fiscal year 2026, which ends coming up on July the 1st. $249 million in property tax revenue generation when they could have generated $257 million. And so that's a $7 million difference there. Over the span of those 2 years, you're talking about almost $20 million in revenues. And so some counties are able to do it. Some counties, fortunately, here in New Hanover, we're seeing this discussion take place right now within the county commission. You've got Commissioners Leanne Pierce, Dane Scalise, and Bill Rivenbark holding the line against the two Democrats on the council, Rob Zappel and Stephanie Walker, who have publicly stated in multiple budget meetings that they want to increase your taxes to pay for their government services. They want to continue to expand the size, scope, and scale of government, and they want you to pay for it. They don't want to make any cuts. They don't want to have to take a look at the budget and say, we want to increase spending on this service, so maybe we should find a way to decline, to reduce spending somewhere else. No, they're not interested in doing that. They want to increase your property tax rate to cover their big wish list items in government. That's what they're interested in doing. And fortunately, we've got a Republican majority on the county commission here in New Hanover, as I mentioned, Pierce, Scalise, and Rivenbark. But there's an opportunity this year for Democrats to take control of that council. There is the opportunity this year with 2 county commission seats up, Leanne Pierce and Rob Zappel. If Republicans and conservatives across New Hanover County are not successful in getting county commissioner, the current chair of the county commission, Leanne Pierce, reelected, you will see Democrat control, a Democrat majority on the New Hanover County Commission, and you and I both know what that will look like. We'll be talking about what the city's talking about right now, the city of Wilmington, where they are currently floating out a freaking 20% tax increase in the city of Wilmington, just months after the board became all Democrats, 7-0. Folks, we know the playbook. We've seen the movie before. We know how it ends. When Democrats get in control, they raise taxes. They make your life hell. They make your life more unaffordable so they can pay for all their stupid BS government programs. We've seen it time and time again, and I'm sorry if you're a resident of the city of Wilmington. You are going to get absolutely screwed by the city this year, and you can thank all 7 Democrats for that. You can thank the Republican voters in the city of Wilmington that did not come out in the municipal elections last year and give Republicans a voice in the room. And so that's the real life, the real world implications of this. Go into a couple comments on our Rumble live chat. John says, county and city managers are stacking the capital improvement plans to load up projects on reevaluation years. Think about last year in New Hanover County. Project Grace with a new library, a new museum. Yeah, was that $600 million or something like that? Insane amount. Another library in North Chase, 2 fire stations, and multi-use bike paths. Don't let Democrats lie about a tax cut. They went up intentionally and purposefully, noting that the next reevaluation year in New Hanover County is 2029. And so we'll see. Hopefully the legislature is able to move forward with this legislation. It, to me, seems smart, seems sensible, and seems like it could be and provide real relief and real impacts for voters across the state of North Carolina. So as we will continue to watch this and many other things in the North Carolina General Assembly, we'll be keeping an eye on this discussion over a levy limit and that other piece of legislation, that temporary reevaluation pause for this calendar year. Looking at the calendar here for the General Assembly, not expecting any votes today, at least not as of right now, in the North Carolina House. Lawmakers will be back Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, the 12th and 13th, and then the entire month in the final week of May. They are expected to be there for votes May 18th through the 22nd. So that could be the week that we see a lot of movement on these pieces of legislation. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget, if you are interested in staying up to date with news around the clock, don't forget to subscribe to the Morning Line email. You can do that over at ncmorningline.com. It's delivered to your inbox for free each and every weekday morning at 6:30. Don't forget to also follow me on social media, X, Facebook, anywhere else for news around the clock. Well, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.